All right, so let's go back. And last time we were talking about this whole idea of Fair Labor Standards Act, minimum wage, overtime. Let's get into this idea of exemptions and who is exempt from being paid overtime. Basically, I want to refer to what we call the white-collar exemptions, okay? They're the white-collar exemptions. And these are the most common exemptions that there are. Generally, there are, let's say 5. I think there are about 5 of these white-collar exemptions. Let me list them, and then we'll go back and cover them. The first one is executive employees. Executive employees. These are all under the white-collar exemptions, right? The second exemption is administrative employees. So you have executive employees, administrative employees. Third is professional employees. Fourth is outside sales. We'll come back and cover all of these. And then the fifth is computer employees. These are your basic, what we'll call white-collar exemptions. Okay. Now, most of these are going to be looking at the salary level and the job duties. Okay? Most of these will be looking and focused upon the salary level and the job duties. Now, when we talk about executive employees, what are we talking about? Who are executive employees and why might they, well, not why would they get an exemption because the law allows it to, but what are we talking about when we talk about executive employees? What might be an example? Kyle, let me pick on you. I haven't picked on you all night.
President.
Yeah, the president, okay? President of a company is going to be an executive employee, all right? President of a company is going to be an executive employee. You may even have a vice president that would qualify as an executive. Basically, they're going to have, Melissa, at the hotel level, it may be a general manager, okay? They're going to have the primary duty of managing the enterprise, okay? And generally, to be an executive employee, they have to control the work of at least 2 other full-time employees. Okay. And then think of what the duties of an executive are: handling complaints, overseeing the operation of the enterprise, directing work, all of the basic duties that we think of executives. That's what's going to fall into that executive exemption. All right. They also have to be paid a salary of at least $455 per week. So to qualify for an executive employee, you have to have a salary of $455 a week and then be an executive employee. All right. Second of these exemptions are what we call administrative employees. Now, what might be the difference between a executive employee and an administrative employee? Jackie?
Like your secretaries or like assistant, everything more assistants, I guess.
Yeah, it's going to be more of an assistant, all right? For instance, I probably qualify as an executive employee in my position, all right? I also have an assistant who is a director of legal services or legal support, okay? And she does a lot on her own. She is not just a secretary, and I don't mean anything demeaning by that, please, so don't let that get out. But she's not just somebody who types, all right? Frequently, she comes to me and says, hey, I think we ought to do this, all right? So she does a lot of independent thinking. Your administrative employees, by the way, they also have to be paid $455 a week, okay? but they generally have to perform non-manual work or office work directly related to the management or the general operation of the company. Okay? Again, directly related to the management. Now, so in that regard, they're still like an executive. And you can be both. I mean, an administrative or an executive exemption, a person entitled to an executive exemption would certainly be entitled to an administrative exemption, although your administrative might not be entitled to your executive, but certainly the other way would be true. They have to exercise independent judgment and discretion on significant matters. Okay. So they would exercise discretion and independent judgment on significant matters. So I have no fear that if I'm last week I'm in Davenport, Iowa, if something comes up, my director of legal support would handle the call. She might try to get a hold of me, and if she can't get a hold of me and it's an emergency situation in one of our hotels that we got to deal with right then, she's going to handle it and we'll move on. All right, because she has that ability. She has that authority, all right? So she exercises discretion and independent judgment. Generally, these are, as Jackie says, administrative assistants, executive or administrative assistants, okay? Team leaders, people who may be team leaders, maybe your financial advisors, human resource managers, as long as they're actually making decisions in management. It really comes down, in most of the cases that I've seen, what it comes down to is where are they and how much independent control do they have, okay? The less independent control they have, the less likely they're going to be an administrative employee. The mere fact that somebody is a secretary would not make them an administrative employee, because why? What keeps a secretary from being an administrative employee?
They're not making individual decisions.
Yeah, they're not making the independent decisions, okay? They're doing what they're told to do or what they're asked to do, okay? And generally, it's going to come down to that function of, are they making independent decisions, okay? Now, the third category of that is what we call, in addition to the executive, the administrative, we also have what is called professionals. All right, professionals. Guess how much they have to make a week? $455. Yeah, there you go. $455. Okay. What would be an example of a professional?
An accountant.
An accountant? What else?
A lawyer.
A lawyer, thank you. What else? Teacher, very good, Tom. Okay. All right. Lawyer, teacher, maybe a writer, doctor. Okay. These are professionals. Can be creative. All right. Inventors, if they're hired for their imagination. All right.
So anyone that has a certain expertise in a field?
Yes and no, and that's a great question. Anybody that has it almost has to be, with the creative professional gets a little cloudy, okay? But it really has to be somebody with a degree.
Okay.
All right? And the reason I say that, and this changed, in fact, this changed since I've been teaching this course. And the perfect example is paralegals. All right? In 2005, and that's where it really came down, and the Department of Labor said, you know what? Paralegals are not going to be exempt professionals anymore unless they have a specialized degree. All right? So you can have a paralegal with a college degree and that person's not exempt. You can have a paralegal that went to, what are some of the schools in Springfield that give paralegal degrees? Somebody, or West Plains, does West Plains have one? Yeah, Drawn Business College, do they give, I mean, there are certain of these schools in Springfield, I know, that give paralegal degrees. Anna?
Do you have to have a degree to be like executive or administrative?
You don't have to have a degree to be executive or administrative. As long as you're making the independent decisions. Yeah. But your paralegal, although they don't qualify for the executive frequently because they're not managing 2 or more people. They don't qualify for the administrative frequently because they're not managing. Okay. Your paralegal may manage a particular project, but may not manage people. And so that's where the difference comes in. Now, a paralegal may not qualify for a learned professional or a professional exemption, but may qualify for an administrative. If you've got the chief paralegal who's watching over everybody else, all right? But most of the time, your professionals have to have a very specific degree. So, if you have it's easy to stay in the law for me, but if you have a paralegal, by the way, I'm assuming everybody knows what that is, but what is a paralegal? Jackie, I know you know.
Legal assistant.
Huh?
It's like a trained legal assistant.
Yeah, it's a trained legal assistant. It helps the lawyer, provide him or her whatever assistance they need to get their cases ready, et cetera. All right? If you have somebody who is working in plaintiff's cases, automobile accidents, okay, and they hire a nurse to be their paralegal to handle all of their medical records and review their medical records, that nurse, because of her specialized degree, is going to be exempt. If they hire somebody to do that same job that doesn't have the specialized degree, probably not going to be exempt. And it may be fair, may not be fair, but that's the way it is, okay? Then you have outside sales. Okay. And their primary duty has to be making sales. And generally, they have to be, although there's this area is changing, but generally have to be outside the office and spend a great deal of their time outside the office. For an outside salesperson, there is no compensation test, so they don't have to make the 455. Because a lot of times they're paid on what? Commission. All right? So they're not going to meet that. All right? And I say they won't meet that. They won't be given a salary of 455 because they're paid on commission and it'll fluctuate. But as long as they're primarily making outside sales, then they're going to be exempt. Then the last one we talked about is computer employees. And guess what their salary must be? No. Threw one at you.
No salary requirement.
Huh? No, they actually do have a salary requirement. It's just weird. $27.63. And I'm not making it up. That's what the law is. Okay? An hour. An hour. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, $27.63 an hour. As long as they're making, now, if they make $4.55, they're fine. But as long as they're making $27.63 an hour, then they're going to be exempt. And again, their job must be primarily doing what?
Yeah, on the computer.
Computers, all right? Not just being on it, all right? Not just inputting information. Because I think that's a good point to bring out. It's not just being on the computer. It's doing stuff that computer people would do, which is code writing, okay, designing programs, working on equipment, application of analysis and techniques, and things of that nature, okay? Very specialized computer type knowledge, okay? All right, any questions about those exemptions? Okay, let's kind of wrap up on the Fair Labor Standards for our purposes in here with child labor. Okay, remember we talked about at the beginning, there is a sexual discrimination component to the fair labor, but we're going to save that until we get into the sexual harassment unit or sexual discrimination unit. Okay. But with regard to child labor, basically the federal or the Fair Labor Standards Act sets forth certain laws and regulations concerning child labor. Okay? Generally, children that are under 14 are not permitted to work. Unless working for a parent who is a sole proprietor of a business, or as a newspaper carrier, or as an actor. So if you can get your children, when they reach age, to be actors, more power to you. You're not violating any Fair Labor Standards Act. Okay? So basically, children under 14 are not able to work.
Actor and newspaper?
Actor, newspaper, sole proprietor of business. So, I don't have any under 14 anymore, but I have one that just turned 14. So, could I have hired him a year ago to work with me? Let's just use, why?
Well, it depends if you own your own business or not, but if you owned your own law firm.
If I'm the sole proprietor of my law firm, but when I was in the legal practice, I had partners, and I wasn't the sole proprietor. Okay? Then no. All right. But if I had my own law firm, I could. If I had my own restaurant, I could. All right? Depending upon what they could do. But generally, 14 and under can't work at all.
It
Now,
has to be a parent,
has to be a parent,
not family.
not family. Has to be a parent. And that parent has to be the sole proprietor. Okay? Now, children younger than 16, over 14, so we're talking 14 and 15, all right? They can work outside of school for the most part, but only in non-hazardous jobs. And I'm not going to get into the limits. There are hours. I'm not going to try to have you remember all the hours because there depends on whether school's in session or not. I mean, as future HR people, as future managers, as future people working and hiring, just know that if you start hiring somebody under 16, you need to really look at the laws on that. But I'm not going to give you the breakdown of the time because there are literally certain hours that they can work, certain hours they can't work. Depends upon when school's in session, when school's not in session. But there are limitations to their work. But generally, 14 and 15-year-olds can work outside of school as long as it is a non-hazardous job. Now, what might be a non-hazardous job?
Lifeguard?
Huh?
A lifeguard?
Lifeguard might be a non-hazardous job. I don't know. They're probably not going to.
Do you have to have a worker's permit if you're under 16?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I mean, frequently people require those. Okay, so for the most part, you're not going to have employers hire people under 18. They're just not going to do it, unless it's fast food, retail, some kind. But even then, they're not going to hire a 14 and 15-year-old. Okay, hazardous job. So, but even if they do hire somebody 14 and 15, it has to be a non-hazardous job. Okay, can't be one that's mining. You know, you can't send them out logging. Okay.
What about mowing lawns?
Mowing lawns. Again, generally mowing lawns are going to be okay because they're going to get under that parent or just out there doing it, and nobody's going to enforce them. Now, also keep in mind what the Fair Labor Standards Act, who it applies to. because you're probably not going to get, if you've got a lawn mowing service that's making more than $500,000 and they got more than 2 employees, I'd say no. I'd say that's a dangerous condition. On the other hand, if they're just out there doing it on their own, there's no problem with that. If they're working for somebody else who makes $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year, there's no problem with that. Okay, so that's a great question. Just depends on whether or not they fall under the Fair Labor Standards Act. Okay. (16 and 17-year-olds may generally be employed for unlimited hours, except for hazardous conditions. Now, there are some exceptions for that. If they're working as an apprentice, they may be able to be employed in a hazardous condition, but generally 16 and 17-year-olds, they can work anytime. Remember, 14 and 15 has some limit. I'm not going to get into those hours, but 16 and 17-year-old have no limits. They just have, as far as time, it just is a limitation with regard to the types of occupation that they get into.
Even if there's like a curfew for under 18?
No, you mean by the state or by the
Yeah.
city? If they've got a curfew, then it's going to depend upon what that ordinance is and whether the law or the ordinance has. A lot of times those curfews will have a carved out exception that if they're working, they can be out. But if you've got a law that says all 16 and 17-year-olds have to be in by 10 o'clock, then they'd be violating the law if they're working. And the Fair Labor Standards Act, while it allows them to work unlimited hours, would not trump a state law that says you got to be in by 10 o'clock. Okay.